You're listening to Three Kitchens Podcast, hosted by Aaron Walker and Heather Dyer. Tune in weekly to get inspired and make good food. Hello and welcome to season 4 of Three Kitchens Podcast.
That's right.
This is our first episode that we're launching.
That's right.
This is where it all begins this year, ladies and gentlemen. Jazz hands.
Jazz hands. Welcome to season 4 of Three Kitchens Podcast. We are still cooking. We're still trying out recipes. We're still failing at some and winning at others. And we're still talking to amazing, interesting, knowledgeable guests, including the one we have here with us today. All right, our guest's name is Jennifer Howes. She is a dietitian, a nutritionist, and an author. She specializes in helping parents introduce solid food to babies and helps them deal with picky eaters as they grow.
Yeah, she's got some really great information for dealing with those little kids. She's kind of got different groups for parents that are dealing with different food problems.
Up to age 6, is like one group because they have different developmental capabilities.
Yeah.
And then over age 6 is like another kind of group.
Yeah. Jen believes in raising happy, well-nourished eaters who have a healthy relationship with food.
So this is what she specializes in, is helping parents deal specifically, not helping kids learn how not to be picky eaters, but helping parents manage this for their kids, because as you'll hear her talk about, there is sort of a division of responsibility in the home, and it's the parents' job to determine what, when, where kids are going to eat, and the kids have their own responsibilities, but her job is helping the parents with their responsibilities.
Yeah.
Which I thought was really interesting. She's not there to counsel kids. She's really here to help parents.
Yeah. How we deal with it as parents and the example we set, and maybe some of the old bad habits that we were taught when we were kids from our parents, or our anxiety around, is my kid eating enough? Are they growing enough? Oh my gosh, my doctor's mentioning that they're in the 5th percentile on that growth chart. I need to get them to eat more. Instead of putting that pressure and creating those power struggles with our kids, there are better, more positive ways to go about changing that relationship with food. And I really love her philosophy around that with raising our little eaters.
Yeah, we learned quite a bit from this. And we fully admit that it has not been a major struggle in either of our homes with our kids. But we know that it's very common. And if you're listening and you think that you're the only one in your world who's struggling with this, you are not. You are not the only one. This is very common. A lot of people have issues with getting their kids to eat the things they think they should be eating. And that's why we invited her on the show, to help us help you in even just a small way, maybe give you a little tip or idea or a different way of thinking about feeding your kids.
And I think even if your kids aren't super picky, or you don't have a huge issue with this, I think we all go through cycles where kids will eat anything and then kids will eat nothing. And being able to manage how you deal with that and then how your kids deal with that, there's those natural developmental things where your kids are just starting to say no when they want autonomy, how to deal with that, because you have to change your thinking as a parent when you then deal with that new stage of kid. And that's great information for everybody, so that you don't feel kind of like you're out in left field by yourself.
Yeah, and it can be extremely frustrating. We put out a little request to friends. We got a few questions that Jen is going to answer.
Yeah.
And clearly it is a very frustrating, concerning, worrying part of parenting. And also, if you are a parent to the new babies, she has written a couple of books, The Parent's Guide to Baby-Led Weaning and Baby Food in an Instant Pot. So if you're just getting into it, maybe you're listening and you're like, well, my kids aren't big enough to be picky yet, but you want some guidance on introducing solid foods to them. She's written a couple of books. I thought it was interesting that she is a speaker and she helps train health professionals in picky eating through something called the Picky Eating Network for Healthcare Professionals. So Jen knows what she's talking about. We hope you enjoy this conversation. And if you want more information, at the end, she'll tell you her website and her Instagram. Go check her out and get all the help that you need.
Yeah.
Welcome, Jen. We're so happy to have you here to talk with us about picky eaters.
Yes, I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
So this is really common. I don't want any of our listeners tuning in and thinking, this is just me. Like, why is it that my friends don't have problems with picky eaters, but I do? Like, what is with my kids? I think that's probably a relatively common thing. I mean, no matter what parenting concern, you sometimes can feel quite alone in that. So what would you say about how common is it? How often do you hear from people that their kids are picky eaters?
Well, up to about 50% of kids will be defined as picky by their parents.
Oh,
So,
wow. Yeah.
maybe you'll get lucky with your first kid, but if you have more than one kid, you'll probably experience picky eating as a parent. But, it is hard if you have a friend or, a sister whose kids eat amazing, and then yours are really picky. And there's a lot of blame and shame in that I think parents put on themselves. But it is, really common. It is normal, and you're definitely not alone if your child is picky.
And how are we defining a picky eater? Like, how do we know when it goes from sort of just a normal testing things out for a toddler, say, to where it's a real concern for parents?
Yeah, that's a good question. And there are a lot of definitions of picky eaters, from extreme picky eating to pediatric feeding disorder to ARFID. But I would say your child is probably, more of an extreme picky eater if they eat less than 20 foods total. And that would probably be a good time to seek some support, because, in that limited number of foods, or maybe they don't eat specific food groups, it could be hard for them to, get all the nutrients that they need to grow well.
Can you tell us what ARFID is?
Yeah, it's avoidant restrictive food intake disorder. It's a mental illness, as an eating disorder would be classified. So you need a psychologist to diagnose it. But people with ARFID, they can have it for different reasons. Like maybe they're terrified of choking, for example, and therefore they're terrified of eating. So it's fairly extreme, can happen in adults and kids.
Okay.
But yeah, that's what it is.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Okay, so what are some of those reasons why kids might be resistant to eating a balanced diet, or like you said, a whole food group, but they don't want to eat it? What can cause that?
So many reasons. So I like to talk about 6 different reasons. So we might be here for a little while. The first one is very normal, and it's just developmental stage, because around a year, between a year and 2 years, growth slows down. So appetites slow down. They learn how to say no, right? They're becoming independent little people, and they start to fear new things, like food neophobia, you might have heard of. So they start to fear new foods, which some people think was, developmentally protective years and years ago, when kids were crawling around and we didn't want them to put all these plants in their mouth.
Oh, interesting.
Become, more cautious as they become more mobile.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. And then there can be a lot of underlying reasons too why it can be hard for a child to eat. For example, oral motor weakness, if they have weak muscles in their tongue or their jaw. So they have, physical difficulty chewing and swallowing, especially harder foods. They could have sensory sensitivity, and eating is really the most difficult sensory task we do. We have different senses, from touch to sight to sound to smell, and we can be over responsive or kind of extra sensitive in any of these senses, or under responsive or kind of less sensitive. There is physical pain. So if your child has pain when they eat, then they'll become conditioned not to eat, and pain can definitely override hunger. So if they get reflux whenever they eat, or maybe a food allergy reaction, or they have cavities, or they have constipation, then it can physically hurt to eat. Yeah. And then nutrient deficiencies. So if your child is low in iron, for example, if they have low blood iron, that can lead to poor appetite. I had this issue with my daughter, but that's a poor cycle, because picky eaters don't eat a lot of iron generally, right?
Right.
And then that can lead to poor appetite and growth.
So it kind of circles back and fuels itself.
Yeah, exactly. And about 10% of kids are low in iron. So, if I see a child who's small, not growing well, not eating a lot of foods, I usually recommend they go get their iron tested just to make sure. And then the last reason, which is most common, and I usually see, is more behavioral, which is good because there are things we can do to change that, easily in our home. And that would be a broken division of responsibility in feeding. So this was a concept created by Ellen Satter, and parents or caregivers have certain roles in feeding, and then the kids have certain roles in eating. And if we're able to trust our kids to follow their roles and we're able to follow our roles, then they'll be less likely to be picky, no battles at the table, and they'll be more likely to grow up with a, healthy relationship with food.
Okay.
So what are those roles?
Our roles as a parent are when the child eats. So preferably, after a year of age, more structured meals and snack times rather than running around all day with that, cup of juice and goldfish crackers, which just kind of dulls their appetite. We're responsible for where. So ideally at the table, with other people, because children learn a lot, even when they're just starting solids, from watching other people eat. And then we're modeling behavior to them. And we want them to be at the table in a supportive seat, which often gets missed as well. So if your kids' feet are dangling, on their chair, they're not physically supported, and it's going to be a lot harder for them to eat.
Oh,
yeah.
So you put a stool under their feet, or?
Yeah. So you could put like a box or a step stool, yoga blocks. If your child's still in like some kind of high chair, you can often find like clip-on footrests, even on Amazon.
Oh.
Yeah. And, if a kid's getting up and down from the table constantly, I'll usually look at the chair too, right? Like, are they comfortable at the table? Right. And often they're just, not physically comfortable there.
I have one who doesn't sit on his butt for long anywhere. He stands at his desk at school even, and they have to sit him in the back so that he doesn't block other kids, because he has a hard time sitting even when his feet are on the floor. So at dinner, he is up and down and up and down. He's always standing up or he's stepping away, and we're always telling him, get back to your chair, back to your chair.
Yeah.
And you really do note. I mean, I don't think it hinders his eating, but it takes a lot longer to eat dinner because he's up and down, right?
And there are some tools you could use at the chair that might help. So some kids will do well with a weighted lap blanket, for example, to help calm them down. Others will you can buy little wiggle cushions that you put on the chair so they can sit there and kind of wiggle around.
Okay.
So you could try one of those two things and see if it's more comfortable for him. But they are, and check that footrest too, because they are more physically stable when standing, right? When we can lock our joints. So maybe it's just, more comfortable for him to eat that way for now. That's okay.
So the parents were when?
Where, and also what?
Right.
This is tricky. It's often the role that the children take over when parents become a short order cook and they're making like 3 different dinners because everybody wants something different. For some kids, if they're, for example, neurodiverse or really only eat like 5 foods, you do have to cater to them, because the number one goal is always to make sure your child's growing well and getting enough to eat. But for most kids, they will do fine if they're served family meal with at least one food that they can comfortably eat. So if they're really hungry, they want to eat buns and they don't want to eat the steak, fine. At least they can have something to eat. And there's other opportunities throughout the day to get in, different foods and different nutrition. We're often concerned about dinner being the biggest meal of the day, but kids get there, like they're tired. Maybe they're excited because everybody's home from work and school. Maybe they've gotten enough calories throughout the rest of the day. So it tends to be the smallest meal of the day. So, what if my kid only eats buns for dinner? That's not usually a problem. It's okay, right? You just kind of want to let go of that. Once you've put the food in the middle of the table, then it moves into the child to take over their roles, which are if they eat that food and how much they eat.
Is it better then to have them dish their own food rather than plate it for them?
Yeah, for sure. And that's called family style meals. Kids like deciding what's on their plate. So instead of bringing it to the table, putting a plate of food in front of them with maybe a couple things that they don't like or they don't want to try, and they say, ooh, this is gross, and run away, and they don't eat anything, right?
Yeah, that's a common occurrence. Yeah. For any parent out there that's worried, we've all been there.
Exactly. So if they get to decide what put on their plate, they like that. Like autonomy is really important to children. So they'll see, everybody else taking bits of all foods. And if they don't want to have it on their plate, if they don't want to eat it, they don't have to. Some families do well with a learning plate where there's another plate on the side. So if they don't want to eat beans, they can put a bean on their plate and look at it, right? They don't have to touch it. They don't have to lick it or kiss it or eat it. It can just be there.
Oh.
Okay.
Unless perhaps they're really sensory sensitive, for example, and can't even stand like visually looking at things they hate, then the learning plate might not work. But for some families, it's a tool that can work.
Oh, that's an interesting idea. Just so that they're exposed to seeing it and maybe they'll get more curious enough to take a bite. Oh, okay.
Yeah. And again, they get to decide how much to eat, and that's without either pressure from the parents or restriction. So if the child doesn't want to eat anything, we don't have to bribe them. We don't have to compare them to their brother. We don't have to guilt them. We don't have to reward them, because all of that is taken as pressure by the child. And we have plenty of research that shows that actually pressure leads to the more picky eating. It leads to them weighing less and eating less overall. So it totally backfires.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's a hard one for parents to get over, because we think it's our job to get our kids to eat.
Well, and it comes from a place of concern and worry, right?
Yeah.
Like you see them not eating what you think they should be eating, and you're worried about it. It's not because you're just like trying to enforce some
militant
rule as a parent. You're actually concerned about their health and well-being, right?
Yeah, like your own anxiety around what your kids eat, and also from everybody else. Like you have grandparents, or you have sitters, or you have other people that are like, well, your kid's not really eating much, or I don't know, your kid only ate this today. Yeah, there's a lot of anxiety that comes into it, and then you pass that on to your kids. So I feel like training parents how to deal with picky eaters is maybe a big part of it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's usually the parent coming to me, can you get my kid to eat? But I work exclusively with the parents. And, sometimes that pressure is even higher up in the chain. Sometimes it comes from a healthcare professional, like a doctor or a nurse, who sometimes is a legitimate concern. Other times they just don't really know how to read growth charts. And they get concerned, right? So they say, you need to get your child to eat more. They don't weigh enough. And then that's a lot of pressure on the parent, who then puts it on the child. And I've seen this with clients, and they pressure the kid to eat, and their kid drops even further off the chart. They, decrease their food intake. But if they're able to step back and trust their child, and that the child knows their own appetite, and take away the pressure, then the child actually ends up eating more and expanding their diet.
That's the tough thing, right? Like trusting your kids.
That's
tough in a lot of areas of parenting.
Absolutely. And I think especially in feeding, because a lot of adults don't trust themselves with food, right? Like diet culture is all around us. So if we don't trust ourselves to be able to follow our appetite, then how can we trust our kids? But kids they're very intuitive eaters, and their appetite goes up and down. Some days they may not eat really anything. Other days they'll eat a lot, and it's good that they can listen to this and follow their appetite. So, we want to trust that instead of trying to beat that out of them, right? And having them follow our own expectations of how much they need.
Well, and I don't know about you guys, but when I was a kid, you were expected to eat what's on your plate, and you don't leave it behind because that's wasteful. And if you didn't like it, tough luck, eat it anyways, because you're not going to waste that food that's put in front of you. And that's just, you sat there until it was gone, or you got it for breakfast the next day, because that was just, I don't know, I guess that was maybe a product of older generations thinking about waste and the money that it costs to feed a family, I guess. I don't know. But I know it doesn't work.
I mean, and that can be quite traumatic, right? Like if you're a child that gags or vomits when you eat certain foods, yet you're forced to sit there and choke it down like that. Like you said, it always comes from a good place of parents wanting the best for their children. And it takes a lot to kind of reframe your mind and a lot of practice, but can be done, and it's better for everyone.
And sometimes you're bringing the thing that you learned. You don't question, well, that's what my parents did, so that's what I'm going to do. I see that all the time, and I go, I see your parents did that, didn't they?
Yes.
I see that all the time in myself. I
Well,
am
yeah.
totally guilty for that at the best of times where you do something by default and then you're like,
Mhm.
wait a second. This looks exactly like it did when I was a kid.
Oh, wow. I sound like my mom.
Yeah, and maybe it's not the best. Maybe I should
Yeah.
shift the way I do things. Yeah.
So, at what kind of age do we start sort of letting our kids guide that food journey for themselves? When does that balance start to shift and we pass it on to our kids' responsibility or put that on their plate? Bad pun?
Yep. Good question. So around age 12 to 13, kids will have enough cognitive ability to think a little more abstractly. So if you're trying to teach, your preschooler that you should eat this because it's good for you or has vitamin A or whatnot, that just goes over the head and it's not helpful. But by age 12 to 13, they're also having more chances to choose food on their own, whether it's now they can walk to the convenience store at school and they have more options, and they'll have to start choosing their own foods instead of the parents choosing everything. So,
Right.
they'll have been raised by you and the foods that are in your house, and that will be normal to them. And you can start asking them questions like, okay, so you have volleyball practice after school. So what do you think we should pack, to eat before that or to eat after that? So getting them to think about it a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Still, the parents probably will have most control over, things that are coming in the house. But at that point, they'll start taking over a little bit.
I feel like that's a lot later than I would have thought it would have been, even though like that's the age my kids are right now. And I feel like that's a long time to be managing their food.
Yeah, it is. But really, it sounds like a lot of work. But once you get these routines in place, I think it's pretty easy. If you have a kitchen is closed rule for an hour or two before supper, and this is a new rule, your kids will protest for 2 or 3 days, but then they'll get used to it. And ultimately, like, kids like routine. So, once you have established these routines, they tend to, I don't want to say fall in line, but, be more willing to follow the rules.
Because they like to know what to expect.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Sometimes when we look at our kids and they're being picky at eating and it's not the behavioral bit, how do we sort of do a little bit of investigation ourselves, figuring out some of those motor and sensory things that contribute to eating? Because when you talked about like their tongue not being strong enough, I've been lucky. I mean, sometimes my kids are picky about stuff, but I've never really had to think about like, oh, maybe they can't chew or eat properly. Like, when do you start sort of investigating those things when your kids are being resistant to eating?
I would think especially when they're small and can't communicate
Mhm.
those things to you, right? Like a child may not know how to say I get heartburn when I eat something or whatever.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Well, it's great to go to your healthcare provider, even your doctor, and let them know your concerns, and they can refer on as needed. But some simple, like, red flags that you could look at. It's hard because there's so many of them, but
Okay.
breathing could be one. So I've seen a lot where kids have really enlarged tonsils and they can't breathe well. And if you can't breathe well, you can't eat well. So if your child snores at night, or if they're always breathing through their mouth, you might want to go see a dentist, an airway-centric dentist, orthodontist, for example. Oral motor. So if they're older than like 2 or 3 and they really can't seem to eat harder foods like real meat, raw fruits or veggies, or food is always like falling out of their mouth, they seem to have difficulty moving it back and forth, that's when you might want to go see an occupational therapist, for example. Same with sensory. And sensory you'll notice in day-to-day life too, not just at the table. For example, if a child is over responsive or oversensitive to touch, they're not going to like walking around in bare feet on sand or in grass. They're not going to like tags on their clothing. At the table, they might prefer certain food textures, usually like crunchy textures or pre-chewed, like processed food, because it's like the same every time they eat it. Or they might not like getting dirty. If they're really young, you'll watch them like finger splay, so spread their fingers out, like trying to get things off of them because they're really sensitive to how it feels. So those are a couple, but I do go through all of these in my courses too, because I think it often gets overlooked. We think it's behavioral, but really there's some underlying reason that's making it tough for your kid to eat. And if we don't kind of undercover that and treat that, then any kind of behavioral changes we make at home are, not going to work as well as they could.
I think that's really good tips and advice, because it's often hard to step back and realize what's going on and just thinking oh, my kid just won't eat anything. He's just being a jerk or whatever. It's wait.
Yeah.
Let's take a quick pause and we'll be right back with some questions from listeners.
Welcome back to another season of food and fun and cooking and craziness. Yay!
Yay, season 4.
Woohoo! We still have some fresh, fun new ideas and things that we've never tried before. So I hope that you continue on your journey with us as we keep cooking. And we look forward to connecting with as many listeners as possible too.
That's right. And remember, as with any podcast you listen to, like, review, give some stars, subscribe, and tell other people who might be interested to go and listen, because if you've ever gone on this is just a quick little note, if you've ever gone on a podcast player search function and tried to look up food podcast or cooking podcast or whatever the thing is you're looking for, good luck.
Yeah, searching by topic doesn't work very well.
So the best way that people find out about podcasts is through their friends and you telling somebody to go and listen. So we really, from the bottom of our little hearts, thank you for sharing this with your friends and telling other people that they might enjoy it as well.
Right.
That's right.
Yeah. All right. And now what you're here for. All right. So we're back here with Jen talking about picky eaters, and we reached out to some friends and listeners and asked for their questions about their picky eaters. So question 1. Are you ready for this, Jen?
Yeah, I'm ready.
All right. Our first friend asked, how do I ensure my kids get the nutrients they need? One is picky about vegetables. The other is picky about meat. They won't drink shakes and they won't eat it when we try to hide their veggies in other foods. We feel this question about meat is particularly interesting since most often you hear about kids not wanting veggies and less about kids refusing meat. So,
yeah. Well, both meat and veggies are a bit more difficult to eat, oral wise when we're thinking about chewing and swallowing, because they're tough and they tend not to be the tastiest, right? Like veggies are quite bitter. Meat sometimes can have a strong flavor too. So I like to think about how we can make these foods tastier and easier to eat. So for example, if we're looking at meat, I like to use a slow cooker or pressure cooker or ground meat to make like meatballs or meatloaf so that it's really tender. And it's okay to add sauce and flavor, right? Barbecue sauce. If your kid wants ketchup with everything, that's totally fine. Dips are okay. And some kids like a crispy coating too. So if you can make like chicken fingers or fish fingers, they're easy to grab. And those sensory kiddos actually like the crunch to that. So those are some things she could try for the meat. I would always, again, try and drop any pressure that's at the table. So it sounds to me like this mom is really concerned. She's trying to hide veggies and sneak them in. So I'd also suggest she looks at Ellen Satter's division of responsibility, maybe see how that's going in her family. And maybe there's an underlying reason, like her kiddo who doesn't like meat, maybe they're low in iron. She might want to get that tested. And I'm not opposed to supplementing either. So if she can find like a multivitamin her kids will take, maybe there's a little bit of iron in there, even like Flintstones Complete. I find that helps parents feel a little bit calmer, right? So maybe their kid didn't eat all of their dinner, but they had their multivitamins. So it gets kids little bits of the vitamins and minerals and helps parents relax a little bit.
And what about sneaking veggies in?
There have been whole cookbooks written on this, right? There was a period of time where I felt like, should I be doing this? Seems to be a thing that I'm supposed to be doing.
Well, I mean, that's a lot of work for one. And I'm not opposed to adding vegetables to foods, but I'd prefer if the kids know it's in there. Because if they don't know it's in there, like this mom said, they don't eat it, right? Like they're going to figure it out eventually. Yeah. And then that's not really following the division of responsibility because they're not making a conscious choice to eat that food because they don't know it's in there. And then they'll be a little less trusting of everything you serve them. They'll be like, what's in this?
Right. You've broken their trust.
What are you hiding in here? Yeah.
You know, if your kid eats fruit, honestly, it contains the same nutrients as veggies. So not that you should stop offering them, but that might help you relax a little bit. And again, some tips like make them tasty and easy to eat. Dips, roast them into fingers, like fry shape or chip shape, add a bit of butter, salt and pepper.
I saw the thing where you had like a fruit roll up.
Yes.
Like the processed fruit roll up, and then sort of like a natural fruit leather, and then a dried raspberry or whatever, and then the fresh one. And I was like, oh, that just makes so much sense that you introduce it slowly by the thing that they like.
Yeah,
like
that's called food chaining. It's taking a favorite food and then you work towards the goal food by just making one small change in, each different food along the
that's
step.
a smart way to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes kids will like freeze-dried or frozen fruits and veggies, especially again if they're sensitive to texture. Because if you think of like a fresh fruit, for example, and you're eating it, the texture kind of changes with every bite. Like maybe the blueberry is crunchy and then you bite through that kind of outer shell and then it's all mushy. So some kids don't like that change, but in a frozen or a freeze-dried fruit or veggie, it's like consistent texture. So if your kid doesn't eat any fruits or veggies, that might be something to try offering.
That's interesting because I have that issue sometimes if I'm eating like fresh blueberries, because I like them firm. And then every so often you get one that's really soft and I'm like, ugh, I don't like that.
Yeah.
So I get it. Like you don't know what you're going to get. It's almost like a surprise every time you bite into one, right?
My kids will leave behind the less favorable veggies or fruits. Like they'll come back and they'll be like, I didn't eat those 5 blueberries because they were the weird ones. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah. I know this is why kids like food that's processed because it's the same every single time you eat it, right? Like a McDonald's hamburger tastes the same every time. Chicken nuggets taste the same every time. Goldfish crackers taste and look the same every time. Whereas other foods, fresh foods or foods you have at home can be a little more variable.
That's really important to think about. I like that. All right. Here's our second question. We've tried to institute a rule that he has to try what's on his plate before he can eat what he's requested or prefers. He refuses to try and will just leave the table without eating. How do we manage this power struggle and get him to try different foods?
Yeah, so I think this is probably a fairly common strategy, and it can work to offer a new food with a preferred food for the child, but I would encourage offering all of the foods at once. And again, letting your child choose if or how much they want to eat of them. Because this obviously just leads to a power struggle. Like we were talking about, there's lots of research that shows it backfires by leading to more pickiness and eating less, which this child is proving to be true to the parents. And we want the dinner table to be a pleasant place where everybody wants to come. We don't want mom or parents coming to the table ready for a fight, like trying to get their child to eat. And then the kids on the defensive, right? Like they come to the table anxious because they know that they're going to have to eat foods that they don't like. And that's not fun for anyone. So if you can just come to the table, again, not comment on what your child's eating, not even talk about the food, just let it be there. They'll end up eating better in the long run, right? It's so much easier and they eat better in the long run. So yeah, I would have her check out the division of responsibility for sure.
I like that idea of not talking about the food at the table, unless it's somebody complimenting the cook, which I'm always here
I'm always for that, yeah.
But but I like this idea. And maybe there's something you could, like there's things that we often do at dinner, like I ask, what'd you learn at school today? What was your favorite part of the day? What maybe was challenging? Like we have these kind of questions that we often discuss. And sometimes the answers, we don't get much of a conversation out of it. And other times we have a real fun conversation about things that happened during the day. So maybe that's a way of like, we're not talking about food. We have it in front of us. We've filled our plates. We're eating, but we're talking about other things. Maybe that would help.
Yeah, I love that. And you can just go online and Google dinner time conversation starters and you'll come up with a ton. And I printed off a page once, like cut them out, put them in a cup and everybody gets to choose one. Just again, to encourage connection, right? And family conversation, because sometimes that's the only place this happens during the day, especially if you have older kids. And then again, takes the focus and pressure off of the food.
Yeah.
I like that.
When those power struggles have gotten set up and then you try to dismantle them, like this question is asking, sometimes even though you've changed your approach, because you've changed it, your kids will fight back harder. So they'll do things like keep trying to turn the conversation around to food and just trying to like disengage and not get upset or not, start to have that discussion is hard to do from our end, and the kids are almost so used to that routine of fighting and arguing at dinner that they'll try harder to do that. And so when you're making those transitions, I find that can be the hardest time, is those first few weeks trying out a new technique or trying to change the language around the table. That can be the hardest. It doesn't get easier. It gets harder before it gets better, and kind of a struggle to go through.
Yes. And sometimes we need our own calming strategies, right? Whether it's like tapping or deep breaths or like essential oils on our bracelet we can smell. Just to kind of take us out of engaging in that. Because our kids can definitely, poke at us. And
good point, Erin. Yeah. Oh boy.
All right. And our last question from a friend is, our kids only want to snack. It's the only time they will eat. Do we just allow this? And how do we not get to the point of feeling totally defeated and just give up?
Yes, kids love snacking. And sometimes, they're just bored and want something to do, which isn't, necessarily the best reason to eat. And often snack foods are easier to eat. They're tastier. They're the crackers, they're the cheese sticks, they're the things that kids like. Not always as nutritious as the meals. So, I get why parents would rather kids eat the meals and snack all day. But I think this goes back to, again, that division of responsibility. So if you can stand firm for a couple days and, say the kitchen is closed, come back in an hour when it's dinner, because I know my kids too, whenever I'm making dinner, they try and come dig through the fridge and pantry, right? Like all of a sudden everybody is instantly hungry 15 minutes before dinner.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. But knowing that obviously they're going to fill up on snacks and then they're going to come to the table and not be interested in eating anything. It can work to try and have set meals and snack times with a little bit of space. And if they're in school, they're used to this routine, right? That's what they do in school. So try and carry that over into the home, and then they'll be more likely to come to the table and be interested in what's offered.
Yeah. And I think what we used to, Erin and I have talked about this many times, because we used to institute it when we had like family get-togethers, and we'd say, you can eat as many of those vegetables as you want. We'd put out veggies cut in shapes and sizes and whatever. Eat as many of those as you want. And then if you don't eat dinner, at least we feel like, well, they ate vegetables. Because, sometimes there's lots going on and they don't want to sit down and eat dinner. At least what they did eat was vegetables. And it doesn't work for all kids. Not all kids want to eat the raw veggies, as you talked about. Maybe it's too crunchy or whatever the thing is. But maybe if the snacks that are acceptable at certain times of day are, I know people who have like a drawer in their fridge that's the snacks.
Yeah.
That's the snack drawer, or the shelf in the pantry. These are the acceptable snacks for certain times. That's what you get to choose from, right? So don't eat the fish crackers, don't eat the dried fruit or whatever, if it's something they like.
Yeah. And I love that with the veggies. That's a great way to encourage kids to eat more, is offer it at a time when they're hungriest. Or maybe if they're offered at dinner, they're going to go for the other things. But if they're hungry and that's all that's there for them to eat, maybe they'll be more likely to eat them.
Yeah,
I guess that, but what I'm hearing you say, Jen, also is that sometimes I think they truly are hungry, but there's a reason, for whatever reason, they're still refusing to eat what's in front of them. So I don't think it's maybe as simple as we're making it sound, right?
Yeah. That's why we always want to offer one familiar, safe food for the kids so that, they can eat, compared to, having to branch out and try these new foods that may cause them a lot of anxiety or stress. At least there's one comfortable food there that they can get in their calories. And then again, just seeing all these new foods, any kind of exposure you can provide to them, whether it's in the kitchen, at the farmer's market, all helps to get them to feel comfortable with with all those new foods or different smells or different tastes.
What's your opinion on the idea that if kids are involved in shopping for food and preparing food, that they're more likely to be invested in than eating it or trying things because they've been involved in the process?
Yeah, I think that's true for most kids. And there is some research that shows that too. So, if you can get your kid to garden or pick out a new vegetable at the store or pick out a new recipe, again, it just provides them with a little bit of extra exposure to these foods, and maybe they'll take some pride that they help to prepare this food or help to grow it, and be more interested in trying it. So yeah, it's great to get your kids involved. I know it can't happen every day. It's a lot of extra work. It's a pain to take them to the grocery store. But,
Yeah.
Anytime you can, it is helpful.
Yeah. I've told the story before about one of my kids who wouldn't eat pancakes. I mean, it's not a big deal. I didn't sweat over it because who cares if he doesn't eat pancakes, right? He'll eat other things. But I discovered at one point, if I put the pancake batter and baked it in the oven in the shape of a donut and say dipped it in a cinnamon sugar at the end, I will eat these all day long. And so I would make those for him for breakfast. It's sometimes you discover just by sort of playing around with things that if it's a different shape that doesn't look like the thing, he's got this mental block around the pancake, right? And now he thinks, oh, but I do like this.
Yeah.
And at the time you're like, this is so ridiculous because it's so frustrating, but maybe that would work. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, it just adds a little more interest to the food for them too, right? If you have cookie cutters, those can be great for cutting breads or pancakes or fruits. And not that you have to put, a lot of effort into it all the time, but maybe sometimes. Or if your kid loves sprinkles, okay, maybe they try this yogurt if it had sprinkles on it. Just bringing in some foods that they like and adding it to some newer foods might help. Or like you said, even offering it in a different shape. Sometimes they'll eat it.
Yeah. I think Heather and I have been pretty lucky. For the most part, our kids, while they have been fussy about a few things, I don't think they fall into terribly picky eater categories. But I think if you do really struggle with your kids' food and eating, having a resource like you, Jen, you're on social media, you've got a practice where you help people with this. Can you tell anyone who's like, oh my gosh, that's me and my kids, I need help with this, where they can find you?
Sure. So my website is firststepnutrition.com, and I do have online programs for parents of picky eaters, both under age 6 and then older than age 6, because they're, different brain development and I think need some different things. But I have lots of help for parents there and on my blog, and a freebies tab as well. So you can go check out free webinars and lots of goodies. And then I'm over at Instagram too at firststepnut.
Excellent.
Yeah.
And you do some really great, I love the videos that you do where you hop on there and just talk about a little look at a specific issue and give some tips. And there's interesting things about using colors to introduce new food. I think you've just got some really interesting little tips and ideas that maybe most of us wouldn't think of. So everyone go and follow along and check it out. And I think you'll learn a lot.
Even if it's not a huge challenge or a huge struggle, it can just make dinner time more fun.
It's not just kids. Sometimes you've got adults in your family who aren't sure about the new thing. And so that's really great. I love that you've got some good tips and advice.
Thank you.
Yeah. So if you're out there and you're struggling with food eating with your family, big or small, check out Jen and all of her great tips and tricks. Thank you so much for joining us today.
And now for the fine print. Join us over on the socials, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, and on our website at threekitchenspodcast.com. Remember, when you like, follow, subscribe, and leave a review, it helps more people find us. Thank you so much for listening.
Yeah.
I think we all know kids are a little bit weird.
Yeah.
We were kids too. We were weird.
Yeah.
We still are.